And then what Tuesday did, of course, was give people so much hope that we can change this and build a multiracial, multi-generational coalition that is going to care about Tennessee's hardworking families and this country's hardworking families.
Hey there, I'm Jesse Mayshark, and this is Headlights, Voices from the Progressive South. Headlights is a production of the Progressive South, a nonprofit media platform dedicated to amplifying progressive voices and values across the southern United States. Voices like Tennessee State Representative Gloria Johnson, who you heard up top. Johnson is one of the leading progressive voices in the Tennessee legislature, and she happens to be my own personal state representative. I thought she'd be a good person to check in with to talk about last week's elections across the South. Later, in the Arts and Culture segment, we'll talk about a festival this weekend in New Orleans to celebrate one of the Crescent City's beloved foods. But first, the elections. This was an off year, of course, without federal elections and only a smattering of significant state and local races. Still, there were some interesting and, from a progressive perspective, encouraging signs across the South. The South's most high-profile races last Tuesday were in Virginia. Former Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger, a Democrat, easily beat Republican Lieutenant Governor Winsome Earl Sears in the gubernatorial race. Spanberger took 57% of the vote, winning by a 15-point margin. This will return the governor's seat to a Democrat after 4 years of Republican Governor Glenn Youngkin. It was a strong day for Democrats across the state. State Attorney General candidate Jay Jones beat Republican incumbent Jason Miyares, who was seeking re-election. Jones's campaign had been hurt by the release of private text messages he had sent a few years earlier, fantasizing about violence against then-State House Speaker Todd Gilbert, a Republican. But whatever misgivings the texts may have given voters were overwhelmed by a blue wave that saw literally every county in Virginia shift more Democratic from the 2024 presidential election. Virginia Democrats also made big gains in the state House. They had flipped it from Republican control 2 years ago, but had just a bare majority, 51 of the 100 seats. They won 13 more last week, giving them 64, nearly a supermajority, and plenty of cushion for Spanberger to work with when it comes to getting legislation passed. Democrats also control Virginia's state Senate, although by a smaller margin, 21-19. So Virginia will become one of 17 states, and the only one in the South, where Democrats control the governor's office and both houses of the legislature, what's referred to as a trifecta. While the scale of the wins in Virginia obviously buoyed the state's Democrats, the wins themselves weren't surprising. Earl Sears wasn't considered a strong gubernatorial candidate coming into the election, and Virginia in general has been trending blue for years. The last time its voters favored a Republican for president was George W. Bush in 2004. That's why a few lower-profile races in more Republican states were seen as maybe even brighter signs of hope for Southern progressives. In Mississippi, which like most of the South has a Republican trifecta in state government, a handful of special legislative elections allowed Democrats to flip 3 seats. 6 state Senate seats and 1 state House seat were on the ballot in the off year after a federal court ordered Mississippi to create more black-majority legislative districts this year. There were also races for 2 other Senate seats and a House seat that had been vacated by their incumbents. The net result was that the state's Democrats emerged with 2 more state Senate seats and 1 more House seat. The gains in the Senate were enough to actually break the Republican supermajority in that chamber, dropping their margin to 34 Republicans and 18 Democrats. That doesn't give the minority party much additional power, but it does make some difference. It takes a 2/3 majority of both the state House and Senate to override a governor's veto, amend the state constitution, and suspend parliamentary rules and deadlines. It also represents the Democrats' first gains in the Senate in more than a decade. But State Representative Sheck Taylor, the chair of the Mississippi Democratic Party, cautioned that the wins were only possible because of courts enforcing the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which was designed to guarantee representation of racial minorities. That law has been under assault from conservatives for decades, and the Louisiana redistricting case, currently awaiting a Supreme Court decision, which we have talked about here, could see it dramatically weaken. The day after the election, Taylor told Mississippi Today, quote, "If the Supreme Court dismantles these protections, we risk silencing the very voices that made last night's historic outcome possible." The other election that sparked interest, no pun intended, was for 2 seats on Georgia's Public Service Commission, which regulates the state's utilities. Both were won by Democratic challengers who defeated Republican incumbents, and decisively, too. Each won just over 60% of the vote, making them the first statewide state offices Democrats have won since 2006. Republicans were quick to downplay the results, noting that a lot of the people who came out to vote last week were driven primarily by local municipal elections, including in Atlanta, which tend to have higher proportions of Democrats. But Georgia State Democratic Party Chair Charlie Bailey saw it differently. In a statement, he said, quote, "In this election, Georgians spoke up loud and clear. They're sick of Republicans who help corporations and billionaires enrich themselves on the backs of working people, and they're ready to hold those Republicans accountable." So what, if anything, can we make of these interesting but scattered election results? To talk through it, I called up Gloria Johnson. She's a Tennessee state representative from Knoxville who gained national attention in 2023 as one of the Tennessee Three, the trio of Democratic state legislators threatened with expulsion by the state House's Republican supermajority after staging a brief protest for gun safety laws on the floor of the House. Johnson's 2 colleagues, State Representatives Justin Jones and Justin Pearson, were expelled, although both were promptly reelected to their seats. Johnson escaped expulsion by just 1 vote. She ran for the U.S. Senate last year, challenging Senator Marsha Blackburn in an uphill campaign that resulted in an unsurprising defeat. But she retained her seat in the state House, where, as I mentioned, she represents the district where I live. She's in her 5th term in the House, and she spends a lot of time talking and working with progressives across Tennessee and the South. So I was happy to hear her thoughts and observations on last week's events. Seth, let's go to the tape. State Representative Gloria Johnson, thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, happy to be here. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, I've been looking for a good opportunity to have you on to kind of talk about things, and this seems like a good excuse for that. So welcome to Headlights. Very happy to have you. And I guess the first thing I would start out with is just looking at last week's elections overall, and especially in the South. What jumps out at you? What did you notice? Did anything surprise you? You know, what are the top lines of that to you?
It were a bunch of great wins for Democrats. And what it shows is people are really tuned in to what's happening. And we know that because we see, the hundreds and thousands of people out in East Tennessee for No Kings protest and things like that. And I can tell you that the one question I get asked multiple times every day through every one of DMs and all my social media, all of my email, when people call my office or they call me, is how do I get involved? And, I want to make sure we can turn this around, and how do I get involved? That is the number one question right now. And people are really stepping up and getting energized because they want to help. And then what Tuesday did, of course, was give people so much hope that we can change this and build a multiracial, multi-generational coalition that is going to care about Tennessee's hardworking families and this country's hardworking families.
So before we get into some of the individual races, when people ask you that, how do I get involved? How can I make a difference? What do you tell them?
Well, first I always say, what issue is most important to you? And then if they have a particular issue that they care about, then I'll sort of direct them in that way. Like a lot of people right now want to know how to help the immigrant community and how do I tap into that. And so with Knoxville, that's so easy with AKEN. AKEN is an amazing organization that is doing great work. And so I always direct people locally to AKEN, but there's Turk and other organizations statewide. If it's women's reproductive health that you care about, of course, Planned Parenthood, Healthy and Free Tennessee, organizations like that. always recommend getting involved with the local Democratic Party. Knox County Democratic Party does more work than I've seen any other county party statewide, and that's a great organization to get involved with. Some people don't particularly want to go to the party, so then I might suggest Indivisible for the things that they want to do. But there are a lot of folks out there doing the work, and there's multiple ways for people to get involved.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. It doesn't just have to be around campaigns and elections. It can be issue focused with all of those nonprofits that you're talking about. So, like, getting into some of the election results, I mean, Virginia was obviously the big headline as far as the South went, because now it's returning to a Democratic trifecta there. There was some effort I saw by, various conservative commentators to kind of downplay that and say, well, Virginia is basically a blue state. And as far as presidential voting goes, it basically has been for about 20 years. But obviously, I mean, we're just coming out of having a Republican governor there. So I guess I think everybody expected Abigail Spanberger to win. But what do you take away from both the scale of her win there and then all of those seats that Democrats flipped in the state house there?
Well, her opponent, Spanberger's opponent, was a hot mess. I mean, that's just all there is to it. I think that what's really telling in Virginia that should be talked about more is they elected the first Muslim lieutenant governor, and then the AG was black.
Right.
I think that we need to talk about, people who are stepping up and making sure that we're representing everyone. And I saw so much of that on Tuesday, and it was great. It was a great thing to see.
And I guess, what does it say about, because I think one of the concerns this year, certainly from the Democratic side, there's been a sense that there hasn't been a tremendous amount of leadership at the national level. There's a lot of people who have been sort of frustrated, and I think there was some thought that, people might just feel kind of beaten down by everything that's going on, by the relentless role of the Trump administration. But the turnout on Tuesday, at least as far as Democratic voters went, did not really look like that.
Yeah, I think, people do feel beat down. They see their neighbors being disappeared. They see that we're getting ready to lose SNAP benefits, that people are going to lose their Medicaid, that some people are going to lose their health insurance because their subsidies are going to be cut and they can't afford their insurance premium tripling. And they're just absolutely tired of that. And they know that we shouldn't be cutting the most vulnerable to give tax cuts to billionaires. And they care deeply about that. And they're going to come out. And you see in New York, what an increased number of young people voting. When you talk about issues that young people care about, they come out. People come up to me all the time. How do we get the young people out? You have to talk about things that they care about. And some of these politicians that have been there for a while are not meeting the moment. They are not. I feel like they so desperately want it to be how it was 20 or 30 years ago. They don't understand. It really wasn't working 20 or 30 years ago for most people, or for those lower income bracket folks. We need to do something different. We need to make sure that we're raising wages, having affordable health care for everyone, and really investing in our public schools.
So turning to those couple of other interesting races in Mississippi and in Georgia, the Mississippi one, I think it stands out because Democrats did make gains in the legislature there, flipped a few seats and broke the supermajority in the state Senate. But that was really made possible because they were under a court order to create more minority-majority districts. And that that's under threat because of this Louisiana case that's at the Supreme Court right now. So I guess, first of all, what do you take away from those races in Mississippi? And second, what are your concerns about what might happen depending on that Supreme Court case?
Well, that's the thing. That's what Mississippi shows us. When we draw the line so that voters choose their elected officials instead of elected officials drawing the lines so that they get reelected. When we have fair maps, we get better representation, and we represent everyone. And if that decision goes the way, I'll just say it, our bought and paid for Supreme Court is likely to take it, it is going to be devastating. There will be no representation for people of color. It is outrageous to me that they are taking us so far back so quickly. And they're hurting, they're not just hurting one group of people, they're hurting all of us when they do this. Some people, it's going to take longer for them to figure out how much it's hurt them, but it's going to hurt them.
Yeah, I've thought about that in terms of the racial representation in particular. You know, there's sort of an uncomfortable echo here, it seems to me, of like you think about Reconstruction, where very briefly there were a bunch of elected black representatives from the South. And then after 1876,
they cut that out.
Right, exactly. They all disappeared. And now, like, we're potentially in a position where that could happen again across the South, right?
And it's the thing that's so shocking and strange to me. I always go back to, we were a supermajority when I first got elected, and the first year I went to serve was 2013. And the speaker that was chosen was Speaker Harwell. And Speaker Harwell never did refuse to call and say, if somebody raised their hand, she called on them. You know, I never raised my hand under Speaker Harwell and they ignored it for an hour. She never did that. My microphone was never cut when she was there, even with a supermajority. I believe that she wanted at least the appearance of actual governance.
Well, and she knew she had the votes anyway, right? So it didn't hurt to let whoever talk wanted.
But these men that have been in charge since 2018 are so terrified of anyone who thinks differently than them or looks differently than them or believes differently than them. It's like we can't even allow this conversation. It is remarkable to me how afraid they are. Beth Harwell was never afraid of debate on a bill. But these folks are terrified of a discussion on a bill. I mean, literally, Glen Casada and Sexton have told me that, well, my members don't want to talk longer than 45 minutes. I mean, you're talking about redoing, after 30 years, how we fund public education in Tennessee. And you don't want more than a 45-minute discussion.
Yeah.
That's insanity. That is not how a deliberating body is supposed to act. As a matter of fact, they used to tell us, well, we do all the discussion in committee. Well, this past session in committee, sometimes they would not let us talk.
Yeah.
And they had zero discussion on the bill in committee, and then it went on the House floor. There was a bill that was increased interest rates on mortgages. And on the House floor, or in the committee room, a Republican asked the carrier of the bill, who was a Republican, does this increase interest rates? And the person told him no. So folks vote on the bill, and then we find out, yes, it did raise the interest rate. And they said it was just for 15-year loans. No, it was for 15 and 30-year loans. Just straight up lied.
And you think all that would essentially get worse if this Voting Rights Act decision strips away minority representation?
Oh, 100%, because they're not going to be happy in the Tennessee legislature until they have 99 seats instead of 74.
Right.
You know, I went there. I'm ready to debate. I'm ready to discuss the attributes of a bill or the bad sides of a bill. I don't care if it's mine or somebody else's, but they are terrified to discuss what a bill does. And I think I know why, but this is what the body is meant to do.
Yeah, I wonder if sometimes they're not just trying to avoid those viral video moments where, so an opposition lawmaker makes a really good point and they don't have a good response to it, and then it gets clipped
right.
and shared and everything. It makes them look bad.
Yeah, I mean, it does. And I feel like we should push harder because a lot of folks, when they come there, the Republicans give them a big black notebook with all their bills and all their talking points in it. And all you have to do is ask one question deeper than what's written in their book, and they can't tell you what their bill does very much of the time. And, but a lot of that discussion is not encouraged. And literally one time I can't remember, it was probably in a GovOps, but it was either with Department of Corrections or Department of Children's Services. And they did an audit. The comptroller did an audit. The audit was terrible. Had all these negative findings. And so we want to ask questions on each one of them. We just don't have time for that. We've got to get out of here.
Uh-huh.
You have a horrible comptroller's audit that they spend a year in the making, and you're going to not allow us to go through that and see what they're doing to fix these problems because you're in a hurry to get home? I mean, I don't even understand why most of them have the job.
Right. Yeah. What are you actually here for?
Everybody around me will be sitting on the House floor and they'll be like, I've got work. I got to go, make some money. I've got to get out of here. Stop asking questions. I need to get out of here. It just boggles my mind every day.
As if the whole point of convening is to adjourn as quickly as possible.
Right.
Yeah. Well, so looking at the other race that kind of stood out on Tuesday, those Georgia Public Service Commission seats, obviously those are kind of low-profile seats, but the Democrats won by big margins, and obviously everybody's watching Georgia ahead of next year with the Senate and the governor's office back on the ballot. There has been concern that maybe the momentum Democrats had in Georgia coming out of 2020 had sort of subsided a bit. What does that look like to you, and or what do you hear from people in Georgia about what's going on there?
Yeah, I don't think the momentum subsided. And it's been funny to watch the jokes about the Public Service Commission. It's like these two important seats because nobody really knows what it is. But understanding that it is a statewide election and Democrats haven't held that in years, and now they do, and overwhelming. So this is all good news. It is an indication that the people are fed up. And I feel really good about Georgia. We've just got to keep this going. And what we've got to do is we've got to keep our coalition together, because the only way Republicans win is by dividing us. And they are working hard to divide us with hate of the other and all of these things. The racism, the misogyny is just so thick. And, that's one of the things about the Mamdani campaign. He had so much joy and so much energy from just being out and being in the public. And I feel sometimes like my colleagues are never out, just hanging out in their districts, because I'm out all the time. And so
I can attest to that. I see you out and about often. I mean, including at events that you're not speaking at or anything. You're just there. Yeah.
It's like, how do you find out what's going on? And it's East Tennessee. So when I'm out and about, or when I'm with my family, I'm with mostly Republicans. So I talk to both sides all of the time. But, that is the thing. That's the thing that, like, pundits or people who are not doing volunteer stuff or working on issues or working with campaigns, all they're doing is reading the ugly stuff, and they sort of lose hope because they're not on the ground talking to people. And people constantly come up to me like, Gloria, how do you do it? How do you sit with those people all day? Or how do you, and I do it because there's so many good people in our community that are supporting us. All I have to do is ask, and somebody is going to be there to help. And the community is just so good about lifting up people who are doing the work. And if you want to feel good and if you want to be hopeful, aside from Tuesday, get out with some of the groups doing the work and get some stuff done. Like I've just been talking to Bridges and found out that refugees, because of the big ugly
this
bill,
is the local refugee services organization here in East
so
Tennessee.
Refugees are totally cut off of SNAP benefits. Regardless if they start paying some, they've cut off refugees. We made a promise to refugees to provide service for them to get them started. And they came here from horrible situations to start a new life. And America said, we will take you in and we will help you get on your feet. And now they cut the rug out from under them. And so I'm starting, on Monday, starting Sunday, I'm going to open the headquarters at certain times and let people bring food down that we're going to give to specifically to refugees because they've been completely cut off. And so there's so many people that want to help in that effort. So people realize as folks lose their SNAP benefits, as they lose Medicaid, we've got to help our communities. And I just see so many people stepping up to do that. And that's what makes me proud to live in East Tennessee, to live in Knoxville, to live in a country where for the first time in our history, a president during a shutdown has said, no, we're not doing SNAP. You can do SNAP when you're in a shutdown. Every president has, but not this one.
Yeah, and we're recording this.
But our communities are ready to step up when our government acts like an ass.
I was just going to say that we're recording this on Friday, where I know the Trump administration is, I think, like right now in court, still trying to avoid, even after they've been ordered by a federal judge to release SNAP benefits, they're still fighting it. Well, I'm glad you mentioned Mamdani, because obviously that race, you could say, well, what does that have to do with anybody winning in the South? Because he's a candidate who, I think a lot of people would say, I mean, there may be some places in the South where Zohran Mamdani himself could get elected, but there may not be many. But I'm curious about, you were talking about it, his addressing the issues and getting out and talking to younger people. Like, what do you think people, other candidates, party organizations, or whatever, not in New York City, can learn from that? Because it was a pretty remarkable campaign. I mean, he started the year, I think, polling at about 2%, and then by the end of the year, he's defeated a former governor twice in a primary and in the general election. So what lessons do you see there?
I mean, what it shows you is, as I feel like, and I've always felt like, even like in deep red East Tennessee, any candidate can catch fire and connect with the people, because that's what he did. But he did it by getting out in the community, by talking to people. Started with that first video of why did you vote for Donald Trump, or, what made you vote that way? And he talked to people and listened to them and created his platform from what he heard. And so it is about getting out and talking to the people. We have my colleagues across the aisle refuse to do town hall. They absolutely refuse. That's at the state level, and that's at the federal level as well. And it's so frustrating. How do you expect to represent the people if you won't get out and talk to them? If you're afraid to talk to them? If you are afraid to talk to the people that you represent, you've got serious problems. And I don't know why voters don't think that way. It's because they've sort of been trained now that, oh, you don't have to do debates. You don't have to have those discussions. People have forgotten how we make our choice. I remember for years, from the beginning, people would say to me, well, they're a politician. Of course I don't expect them to be honest. And I'm just like, you should expect a higher level of honesty from your elected official, not no honesty from an elected official. I am so sick and tired of just the nonstop lies. And then in the House, we're not allowed to speak, so we can't call out a lie.
Well, I wanted to ask you one last question about some recent news. You mentioned Glen Casada earlier, our
oh my God.
disgraced, convicted, criminal, felonious former Speaker of the House, who he and his Chief of Staff, Kate Cawthron, were both right on the verge of jail time. And suddenly, Thursday night, we get the news that President Trump has pardoned both of them, which is something he's making a habit of, pardoning corrupt elected officials. Some people say that Trump doesn't have any empathy. I think we found the group that he does seem to have some real personal
criminals.
Exactly. I guess just, what's your reaction to that? Obviously, you were there through all that with Casada, and now, the end result of all of this, years of effort by federal prosecutors, all the investigation, the trials, everything, and now that's all just thrown out the window.
It's just remarkable to me. And of course, the Republicans, they were so mad at him. He protected a pedophile in our own body.
That's right.
It's so much of what they're doing is what we're seeing at the federal level. And so, of course, a 34-count felon is going to take away a felony from an elected official. And what really hit me last night was, so me and a couple of my colleagues, two of my colleagues get expelled, and I'm threatened with expulsion because we talked out of turn. But you can go out and commit felonies, and that's okay. And that's when I said last night, and I've said it before, but I'm really, I don't ever want a Republican to talk to me about law and order ever again. With January 6th, all these crazy pardons, that criminal they elected in the White House, the pedophile they protected in the state legislature, the criminals they're letting go free, from Brian Kelsey to Casada to Kate Cawthron. Now, here's the interesting thing. Are they going to let the woman go? Uh-huh. Or is the woman not going to get a pardon because she's a woman, or is it because she told the truth at the end?
Right. The one thing that's maybe unforgivable.
Yeah, right.
All right.
Telling the truth, unforgivable. I don't know. I think women is unforgivable.
Right. It's a bad combination. All right. Well, we will wrap it up there. But thanks so much for joining me. And we'll do it again. I'm sure there's going to be a lot to talk about next year.
I'm sure.
As we move back into the legislative session. So, State Representative Gloria Johnson, thanks a lot. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. It was fun.
New Orleans has a lot of festivals, and it also has a lot of food, so it's natural that those things come together in various ways. Like this Saturday, November 15th, when the 8th annual Beignet Fest comes to New Orleans City Park. The festival was founded as a nonprofit fundraiser to support services for the city's autistic population. It celebrates, obviously, the fried and powdered sugared pastry that is among the city's iconic foods. Beignets are originally French, brought to Louisiana by the Acadians exiled from Quebec. In New Orleans, they are most often associated with the touristy Café du Monde in the French Quarter. But lots of other places in the city make beignets, both sweet and savory. Beignet Fest provides a chance to sample many of them from restaurants, caterers, and food trucks. Among the 40 or so varieties on the roster this year are crawfish beignets from Any Occasion, plantain mochi beignets from the Asian Outdoor Kitchen, gumbo beignets from Catered To, crawfish etouffee beignet fries from Diva Dog. I'm having a hard time envisioning that, but it sounds good. And espresso chocolate ganache beignets from the Vintage Nola. Of course, you can't have a festival in New Orleans without music, so Beignet Fest has that too. Headlining the day's performers is Louisiana singer-songwriter and bandleader Marc Broussard. Also on the schedule are the Rebirth Brass Band and drummer Jeffrey Jellybean Alexander. The festival runs from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. Saturday in the park's festival grounds. It's also worth mentioning that City Park in New Orleans, if you haven't been, is one of the great public parks in the country. It covers 1,300 acres, about 50% larger than Central Park in New York. It's home to the world's largest collection of mature live oak trees, a few of them more than 700 years old. It also holds the world-class New Orleans Museum of Art with its amazing sculpture garden. Which is to say, there's plenty more to do there before or after Beignet. And that wraps us up for this week. Remember, the Progressive South is a nonprofit media outlet, and you can find information about contributing to our efforts on our website, theprogressivesouth.org. Thanks to Bark for our theme music, and to Lord Seth the Libertarian for his production work at Barbarian Production. And thanks to you for listening. Remember, you can call and say hey from wherever you are. Just leave us a message at 865-214-7764. That's 865-214-PROG. Tell us your first name, where you're calling from, and take up to a minute to let us know what's going on where you are. You can also write me at jmayshark@theprogressivesouth.org. We'll talk to you later. Frith.